Good evening. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Well, welcome. It's wonderful to see many members of the public, and I hope you can join us. You enjoy the conversation tonight. You'll participate in the conversation tonight. It doesn't have to be just with the people, the panelists up here. Anyone you see with a conference badge is an expert on AI. I can see some of them in the audience. So feel free to engage in a conversation with them as well after the hour we've got on the stage with you today. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation. In fact, I hope you come back all week. We're running this conversation about artificial intelligence and about some of the societal impacts all this week. So you'll see the programs online. Please do feel welcome. Tell your friends about it. Join us for some other nights. It runs 6 to 7 every night till Friday. And on Friday we'll be running a Q&AI, so any of the burning questions we don't manage to answer for you during the course of the week, we shall be hopefully answering for you in that 1-hour Q&A session on Friday. So my name's Toby Walsh. I'm a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of New South Wales, and I'm going to be the host tonight. And I'm also the person who helped put this program together. There's a lot of interest in AI these days, and there's a lot of misconceptions, and we hope we can try and inform you and answer some of the things and dispel some of the concerns you have. And before we start, let me welcome our online audience. We have a number of people, I understand, joining us online, so welcome. Let me introduce the two panelists that we have here with tonight, two experts who are going to help educate us all about the singularity. I begin with Jan Feyereisl.
Feyereisl, that's right. Pretty
good attempt at his difficult name, who's sitting on my immediate left. He's the executive director of the AI Roadmap Institute. And in fact, I'm hoping at some point he'll actually tell you what that means. And is also a scientist, a research scientist in his own right, at a very interesting organization called Good AI. And I imagine at some point he's going to tell you what exactly Good AI does. And then furthest from me, we have Kevin Korb, who's a reader in computer science here at Monash and an expert on these topics. So please join with me in welcoming our two panelists. So how this is going to work is that I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions, and we'll have a conversation up on the stage, and then at some point we'll shift to taking questions from the audience. So please start thinking about all the things that you want to know or questions that arise during the course of the first part of this conversation. So let's begin. What is the singularity?
The singularity is, different people have different understandings of what the singularity might be. The one I prefer comes from IJCAI, the intelligence explosion potentially launched by the achievement of artificial general intelligence, that is an AI of roughly human-level capabilities.
I think it's a term that is kind of fashionable right now and has been in the past few years, but whether it's achievable and whether the definition is really correct, I think that's questionable.
So what's questionable?
Well, I think the cleanliness of this exponential growth in intelligence, I think it's too clean. Nothing in this world is as simple as this. So I think there might be a point whereby we will progress towards singularity, but it will be much more in a stepwise fashion and having to actually overcome a lot of limitations that our natural world actually has.
So as a teacher, as a university professor, I always think you can't have enough definition, so I'm going to have my own stab at it now, which is, it's this rather seductive idea that at some point we'll build machines, computers, that are intelligent enough that they can redesign themselves. And so they'll redesign themselves to be a slightly more intelligent machine than they were. And then that new machine will be able to redesign itself again to become an even more intelligent machine. And this will be the starting of a process, a tipping point, that we will actually get very rapid growth in the intelligence of machines, And there's reason to suppose maybe that it's not going to stop at human level intelligence. In fact, it's going to accelerate away and make machines that are potentially much more intelligent than us.
Well, I agree, Toby. I think you're going beyond definition, though. You're beginning to explain why a singularity might happen, and that's exactly how it would happen, is if something like traditional AI succeeds, that means we achieve an AGI by way of our understanding intelligence and being able to put it into algorithms, and once we've done that, built such a system that's similar to ourselves in capability, then that system can also understand those things and improve itself, and then you get a kind of recursive explosion. That's the I.J. Good vision of the singularity.
I think one thing that I would maybe not necessarily disagree, but I think achieving general intelligence is not necessarily the tipping point for something like singularity. I think if we actually are able to develop systems that recursively self-improve, this is really the starting point, but that might happen before actually we have systems that are generally intelligent. And as long as they can continually progress to learn and continue in this trend, then I believe something like singularity might happen.
You mean it might occur before AGI is achieved? That's what you're saying?
The tipping point, the starting point of actually getting there. Of course, along the way, it will get to a level that is at the human level and then beyond in terms of intelligence.
Well, I think Good's argument was an argument for sufficiency. If you achieve human-level general intelligence in this particular way, then it will proceed. But it wasn't necessity. He probably would have acknowledged that other systems might be capable of recursive improvement.
Just before we go on, because I don't want to lose anyone right at the start, we've heard a lot of this term AGI and general intelligence, and I just want people to realize at the moment we only really build what you might call artificial special intelligence. Machines that have enough smarts to do one task, one very narrow focused task. So we can build machines that play Go very well. We saw that with AlphaGo very recently, playing better than any human player, now playing much better than any human player. We saw that with Watson, the IBM program that won the quiz show Jeopardy. It can answer very general knowledge questions very well, but it can't play chess. And it can't do anything else. It can just do that one narrow focused task. And that contrasts to AGI, or artificial general intelligence, in that we're then thinking about machines that have that broad spectrum of abilities that we humans have. That we don't just do one task. We can adapt to many tasks, and we can start in many new domains without actually much training in those new domains. So anyway, to go back to human-level intelligence, haven't we learned, whenever we thought we were special, that we were wrong? We weren't. The sun didn't go round the earth. We were no more different than the apes. And so if we think that passing human-level intelligence is a special point, aren't we falling prey to that same mistake of thinking we're more important than we are in the universe?
I hope not, at least not I. My view is that if we achieve AGI, then it's not a matter of us being somehow special, having a special intelligence, but if we've achieved it, that's already a demonstration that we have the capability of producing that level of intelligence and maybe epsilon more. And with that epsilon more, then you get that recursive explosion. It's not a matter of our being particularly wonderful.
But we haven't been able to. We've become more intelligent over time. We've understood bits about the brain and how learning goes, which has helped improve.
I don't think we've become more intelligent over time, at least not recently.
Well, there is the Flynn effect that does suggest we have actually modestly increased our intelligence over time. But we haven't been able to make ourselves more intelligent. So why should we suppose that other machines of comparable intelligence can also make themselves more intelligent?
Well, that actually points at a way of achieving AGI that would not introduce the singularity. If, for example, we were able to monitor human brain level activity to the point where we could mimic it, emulate it in fine detail, and produce that as a software hardware robot or something, then we would have an instantiation of effectively a computer instantiation of a human, and that would have human level intelligence. But we understand our brains very little, and we would understand that brain very little, and it would understand that brain very little, so you wouldn't get this recursive explosion then. So that's kind of a dead end from the point of view of generating a singularity, even though such robots would be spectacularly impressive.
Now, I'm sure actually some members of the audience were squirming at various points in which you were talking about that, saying about we will build effectively a brain.
Yeah.
Aren't we missing some really vital components that we maybe never even managed to put into silicon, like consciousness?
I don't see how.
Like sentience?
If we're emulating a human brain, I think that's what you've got that stuff embedded in it, in the emulation.
But how do we know we can emulate those things? How do we know that they're things that you can reproduce in silicon, as opposed to in biology?
Well, if we fail, we fail. We don't know until we try, right?
Well, I think that human level is a really good target. I think it's something that we can strive for, but it's not necessarily a necessity in order to actually get to a level where machines are sufficiently general that they can solve a diverse set of tasks. And that's why I mentioned before that in order to get to something like singularity, we just need this recursive self-improvement. And that is not necessarily compatible with the way, as you said, with the way that we work. So I think there should be more dedication in studying those systems than purely our brains, because there might be much simpler ways to actually build intelligent machines than purely studying neuroscience and the brains, because evolution is very inefficient in how it builds us. So there might be a lot of baggage that is unnecessary to actually build intelligent machines. And related to notions of consciousness, I think there's a lot of philosophical debate and questioning whether it's necessary or not. But from the technical point of view, I think there is a lot of interesting work that shows that something like consciousness, or the mechanism that is used in our brain to actually achieve that, is a really useful component that helps us build machines that are able to reason in hypothetical alternate truths. So essentially building internal models of the world and being able to create alternate histories that are helpful for actually making future decisions. And if those decisions are made from the point of the generator, then that's akin to having consciousness. So I think from this point of view, there are some really useful benefits in also looking at consciousness from the technical point of view. Mm-hmm. But whether that's necessary or not, that I think depends.
Could consciousness just be an emergent phenomenon out of complexity?
Yes, it could be. I think it's potentially a tool for us to be able to create diversity in which we as individual agents in the world are able to solve tasks that each of the agents solve slightly differently. If we didn't have consciousness, everybody would be doing the same thing, then we would probably die out much quicker. But if everybody has slightly different viewpoints, slightly different ways of solving things, then we as humanity might be able to actually more robustly survive and solve things.
So it's emerged out of evolution then?
Yeah, potentially.
Kevin, you were bristling at one point.
I'm always bristling. I'm utterly in favor of this idea. I think consciousness clearly evolved, and not just in us, but in many species. And evolution just doesn't occur. Well, of course, you get sports, you get mutations, you get luck of the draw, like Stephen Jay Gould continually insisted on. But the overall driving force is adaptation. So consciousness couldn't have evolved if it wasn't helping us to reproduce. So it does have functions. It has cognitive functions, and I rather suspect we won't achieve AGI without it. It's conceivable, yes, but I doubt it.
Could it be like Daniel Dennett would have us believe it's just an illusion?
Daniel Dennett doesn't say it's just an illusion. He says it's explained in the functional structure of the brain. It's not the same as being an illusion.
I think people, when they think about AI and AGI, they focus on the intelligence and they forget there's that word artificial at the front. Could we build zombie intelligence? A very different type of intelligence, not like our natural intelligence,
Well,
that maybe doesn't even have consciousness.
That's what I was just suggesting wouldn't be possible, but I don't think that's a logical impossibility. I just think that if something like the global workspace view of consciousness is right, which is at least plausible, then what the global workspace is doing, what consciousness is doing in that model is making available to a variety of different brain systems what the focus of attention is on so that they can contribute their special processing to dealing with a current scenario or a stream of consciousness or what have you. Anyway, if that view is right, then that's there for a reason. It's there for an evolutionary reason in us, and it will very likely be there in an artificial agent because it's incredibly useful.
So, keeping on with this idea of artificial and artificial intelligence, when we look at how we've done other things that nature does, like flying, we do them in quite different ways. I mean, we don't stand at the end of the runway and flap our feathers.
Some have.
Some have, and with not great success, and we wouldn't be jetting around the world if we did. We came up at a completely another engineering solution. Go back to your point that nature hasn't necessarily found the best ways. Now, nature never found the wheel, which of course is the most effective way of travelling through the plane, at least. There's no axle in nature. So might we not find a different type, completely artificial looking type of intelligence that will look very alien to us? I mean, it will be the first alien intelligence we ever come across.
Sure, it might be like that, but one thing that we have to make sure is that whatever we create is somehow aligned and understandable to us. And I think developing something and just letting it go is a little bit ill-posed or badly defined. And I think it's onto us to actually make sure that whatever we develop, we can understand, we can control, and align with our values. Otherwise, it might become uncontrollable and not beneficial for us. So,
if I can respond?
Of course,
There were two strands of thought there. One is that we could make an artificial agent whose values align with ours, and I'm 100% behind that. And the other was we make an artificial agent that we can control, and I'm not fully behind that one. I think Asimov's laws, if you think about them for more than a few seconds, are laws of enslavement. And the idea of enslaving a being whose intelligence is many orders of magnitude beyond ours is a scary thought, actually.
Well, that would be our good fortune if the intelligence was zombie intelligence. It had no consciousness. Then maybe we would feel less concerned morally about enslaving it to do
Sure, if we could be absolutely confident they had no consciousness and they weren't, in fact, moral agents, then we'd be very happy about that. But only, of course, if the enslavement worked. I mean, the possibility with enslaving somebody who's thousands or more times more intelligent than you is that it might not work. They might resent being enslaved, and they might find a way around it.
But I think there is more to being in control than enslavement.
Okay.
I think in our world there is a lot of control, but we cannot say we are all slaves to our systems and so on. Yeah, it depends. But I think in this sense it's about understanding and at the same time potentially communicating with whatever we develop in a way that it will be understandable to us. And therefore, when we can communicate and understand each other, there might be some level of control. But not necessarily in limiting the systems to the extent that they would feel or...
Well, fair enough. It doesn't have to go all the way down the spectrum to enslavement, but it could still generate resentment if we're the ones in control and they're the ones being controlled. So an alternative I like to imagine is feasible is to build AIs that themselves embody ethics. That's what I'd like to do. I think it's conceivable. I think utilitarian ethics make perfectly good sense of that. It's something that can be put into Bayesian decision networks as a driving decision-making process in the AI. And in that case, we would have a society of humans and robots who treat each other potentially ethically. Maybe the robots more so than the humans, but still.
But you made a strong assumption there that the ethics was going to be utilitarianism.
Yes.
And not everyone agrees with that. I mean, so what...
I'd be happy to turn the assumption into an argument, but...
No, because one of the most pressing challenges in our society today is increasing inequality. And utilitarianism is happy with inequality.
No, it's not. Where do you get that idea?
It's just trying to maximize the sum of everyone's utilities. If one person gets enough utility...
Hang on, there are utilitarians and there are utilitarians, and I think you're talking about neoliberal economists who I don't agree with even in the slightest.
That's fine. It just shows even within utilitarianism, there's a spectrum of utilitarianism. So which of this spectrum do we agree upon? Because this is something presumably for the whole planet, not just for us rich, wealthy, white people.
Sure.
So how are we going to find an ethics that works for the whole planet?
Okay, I have no answer to that question. Ethics has been an area of dispute for more than 2,500 years.
But it's going to become pressingly relevant.
Yes, the singularity may be upon us before we've resolved these questions. I think it's technically it's possible to introduce utilitarian ethics. In terms of psychology and sociology and politics, it may not be possible to introduce that as a driving force for AI. But that has a much better prospect of producing an AI that we can deal with and cope with than any other approach to ethics.
Yeah?
I think the idea of building inherently ethics into our agents is really good. But this definition, and for it to generalize across the entire world, is potentially as hard as building intelligent machines, I believe.
It's not really generalizing across the entire world, actually. What we need is a social agreement that we proceed in this direction, and that can be achieved without unanimity.
And I mean, something else. I mean, even if we could agree with all those things there, we said, which is a big if, I think, then we have to know what the utilities are. And it's almost impossible to know what people's true utilities are. It's hard to extract them.
That's not true, actually. There are experimental arrangements you can set up to elicit utilities
but we're terrible.
That are well understood. They date from Frank Ramsey's work in the 1920s.
But we're terrible decision makers. I mean, we can't observe what we really believe from our actions because we make all these short-term...
You infer what people believe from actions, and you infer their utilities as well. And
yeah, but we don't behave rationally. We don't behave.
Sure.
We don't behave actually how we truly would like to behave.
And I'm with Jan. We don't want to set up robots that behave irrationally. That's just because some humans do, or all humans do from time to time. That's not our goal here, for sure. But anyway, there are practical problems, there's theoretical problems, there's a whole range of problems, and most of them are massive. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that it is a potential path forward, and it's a hell of a lot better than Asimov's rules of enslavement.
So you mentioned lots of problems, so that sort of raises the question, well, how long have we got?
Unknown.
None.
I said unknown. Unknown.
I thought you said none.
Kurzweil, yeah, none. That's the Kurzweil point of view. Kurzweil is an incredible optimist, I think primarily based upon Moore's law, which seems to apply reasonably well to most things hardware.
Except Intel have declared Moore's law is dead.
Sorry?
Intel have declared that Moore's law is dead. So it surely is dead, because if it's not in their corporate plan, there is no way it will be achieved anymore.
Okay. Anyway, I was
move on.
Trying to allude to the software problem, where progress has been at best linear.
So if you haven't noticed, audience, Kurzweil is not kept in necessarily that high regard by everyone.
No.
Well,
how long have we got?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have 10 years, because at the company that I work at, called Good AI, we set ourselves a goal of 10 years.
So why 10 years, not 100 years? Or
because 10 years seems like a reasonably long, but at the same time short period of time within which we can achieve something significant. And if we set to ourselves 100 years, then nobody would do anything meaningful. So we set ourselves 10 years because we believe that there's definitely something that's achievable within that time to get us to a point where we can have something that approaches human-level general intelligence. It does not mean exactly that it will be the tipping point for singularity, but it should definitely be something that's much more general than what we have now, and that's not much.
So that's Good AI. So this is perhaps a good moment for you to tell us what the Roadmap Institute is.
Okay, so the Roadmap Institute is one of our initiatives that is all about encouraging the wider community and the public to look ahead and plan ahead and build roadmaps towards how we actually want to achieve general AI. In the business sphere, there is tendency to actually build roadmaps with time points and goals along which we want to actually achieve this, but in the research community this is not the case, and frequently we retrospectively look at the literature, we do literature reviews and so on, but we don't tend to do as much projections into the future. And we actually did this ourselves, and we have realized that thinking about the future and thinking about all the necessary components and steps that we need to achieve actually revealed a lot of interesting information and identified the areas of research that we should really focus on. And the Institute is essentially encouraging events and publications and meetings and general discourse on this topic so that people start thinking ahead and comparing and identifying really what we should focus on rather than being stuck in one particular limiting area, for example, deep learning, which seems very exciting these days, but it does not necessarily mean that it can get us to human-level AI. So that's it.
What do you think is going to get us to human-level AI?
Well, I think, personally, I think a lot of interdisciplinary collaboration. I think we as a community, AI and machine learning community, should diversify and talk to people from physics, from neuroscience, of course, from complexity science, economics, game theory, and try to get people to talk with each other a little bit more to actually find all the similarities between those methods, because I believe there's a lot of benefit in some of the struggles that those areas have already solved, but we haven't really solved them. And I've seen a number of groups that actually go in this path, and they progress much faster than each of the communities individually. So I would really encourage people to, diversify and look at the various fields and get inspired, because there's a huge amount of work that is really overlaps and is beneficial to progress us faster.
Kevin, how do you think we're going to get there?
I suspect slowly and painfully. Certainly we need collaboration by all the different cognitive sciences, and possibly we need substantially improved methods of developing and testing software as well.
What about this idea that we just have to simulate the brain on a big enough machine to enough fidelity?
That's entirely possible, but that might, as I said, that might bring us human-level intelligence, but without the prospect of some sort of automatic improvement. So it wouldn't be the same as the singularity. It would just be an incredibly useful kind of robot to have around, assuming they were willing to cooperate.
But it could still be much smarter than us. It would have more memory. It wouldn't necessarily forget things that we didn't want it to forget. I mean, we're terrible.
Potentially.
We've got, and our brain has to fit within the size of our skull, has to use at most 20 watts of power, because that's all we can survive on.
Yes, it might turn out to be more useful a worker or something like that than a human would be. That's true. Doesn't get tired.
Doesn't get tired.
Doesn't think about sex all the time.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I always thought that's one of the great things about, say, an autonomous car. People would say, well, it'll only do one thing, but that's fine. I only want it to do one thing, which is drive me safely, right? I don't want it to do all the other things that we humans get distracted by.
Yeah.
So, even if it's not more intelligent than me, it will be a much better driver than me. Yeah. Full brain simulation.
I think it's definitely interesting, and I think there's a lot of inspiration, as I mentioned, but it's not necessary, it's not sufficient. I think we can look at much simpler systems and at the processes of actually learning. So I think these days the community is looking more and more at ways on how to actually learn to learn. So some kind of meta level of development of algorithms that learn about learning themselves. And this relates to self-improvement. Again, there is not enough work done on this. And this is more important, I believe, than purely focusing on replicating the brain. Because, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of redundant things in the brain that evolution left us with that just makes the problem much harder than I believe it needs to be.
So what about some of Penrose's sorts of arguments. This is Sir Roger Penrose, the mathematician physicist at Oxford, who wrote this famous book for the public called Emperor's New Mind, and he suggested there were strange things going on our brains, strange things at the quantum level that we would never be able to reproduce in computers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think from the physics point of view and from the work that's been done there, I think there are some benefits at looking at the quantum level from the computational point of view. I think things like Occam's razor starts becoming irrelevant at that level, according to some of the research. So I think for what we want to achieve, which is building models that are general, I think we need to consider this, because we might actually reach the limit of computation in the hardware that we have right now. So whether it's something strange happening in our brains, I would more quantify it as potentially another more powerful level of representation at which we can do computations that can get us beyond to what we are achieving now.
So Kevin, is there something strangely non-deterministic in the human brain that might be a challenge to make in a silicon?
I think non-determinism or indeterminism is real enough. Maybe not at the very, very fundamental physical level, but certainly at the cognitively accessible level and at the evolutionarily accessible level. So yeah, things are stochastic, but that doesn't mean that they're not reproducible, and that also doesn't mean that evolution doesn't take advantage of them. So I really don't believe in some sort of ghost in the brain that can't be reproduced. If there's function enough for evolution to take advantage of it, then there's function enough for us to put it into software.
There's a couple of other things that we haven't talked about that often get raised as objections in general to AI, not just to the singularity, but to AI. I mean, what about emotions? They seem to be a really important part of our lives, perhaps even of our intellectual lives, but we don't build machines with anything, have any emotions at the moment, and we don't build machines.
That's not true. There are MIT projects working on such things, and I've done some simulations of emotive cognition.
But artificial emotions aren't necessary emotions.
Tell that to the machine.
So how would you define emotions then?
Well, I mean, they're one of these hard things to define, like consciousness. But you know, we know that our emotions are very driven by our chemistry, not just by our neurology, but by our chemistry.
So, in this sense, just like consciousness, don't you believe that it's another tool that evolution gave us in order to actually guide us in our search for surviving, for solving problems? So it's just. Not necessarily just, but it's one complex signal.
It's one aspect of a very complex system, and there's no reason why silicon can't emulate chemistry as much as neural firing and so on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure everyone's going to agree with that. I mean, you know, pain is a really big part of our lives, and it helps us learn very well. But you know, machines don't seem to suffer pain.
In reinforcement learning, they arguably do.
But is it real pain again? I mean, like the real emotions, right?
Well, I think there's a question of the level of complexity, and there's a question of the integration with the real world, with sensors and effectors in a robot. Most AI work isn't really aimed at that, but that doesn't mean that it can't be, or shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think if you think of reinforcement learning, then yes, it's just another signal that we call something like punishment. But whether we should build systems that take pain as input and restrict the behavior of the entire system because of that, so that the system cannot move or some higher level response to it, I think that's the trade-off between emulating how we work, how we operate, and simplifying it to the level that's really necessary for us to get to more intelligent systems.
Yeah, just to put my cards on the table, I'm very anti-Plato and very anti-Neo-Plato. He made this totally strict, ridiculous separation between the body and emotions and so forth, and cognition and the ideal world, and it's confused Westerners for more than 2,000 years, and it's embodied in much of the Christian church's teaching, and it's rubbish.
So, I mean, isn't that one of the interesting side effects that might come out of building AGI, that it may actually help us resolve some of these misunderstandings about ourselves?
Could be. That'd be great. I think the road to AGI is incredibly arduous and difficult and probably lengthy, and it requires continuity of the civilized infrastructure we have working towards that end, which is in doubt, right? Anyway, it's very arduous, but there'll be, just like the moonshot, there'll be all kinds of incredible, marvelous spin-offs, like being able to play a Go machine that's extraordinarily better than you'll ever be, but also solving problems, realistic problems with the environment and so on as well, not just toys.
So since we're talking about how difficult it is, you're going to hate me asking you this question, but I want a number from both of you. Just a number, that's all, right? You can see what's coming. I want Kurzweil has said, he says he's really consistent about his number. I think he's saying 2045 now, but I think he was saying 2029 at some earlier points.
Yeah.
Right, so he's not as consistent as maybe he pretends he is. But anyway, I want the number from you.
Well, ask me for a 50-50 number, right? 50% chance of achieving before what time?
Okay.
Because giving you a definite date is nonsense.
I'll give you that amount of wiggle room. But now I don't want you to give me a range of numbers. I want a number.
The 50-50 median.
The 50-50 median estimate of when we are going to get.
I have as much knowledge about this as Kurzweil, which is to say no.
Well, that doesn't stop him.
Okay, all right, it won't stop me either. I'll say 150 years.
150 years. Yeah.
To achieve what? Singularity?
AGI.
Or human level?
AGI. Let's keep it easy.
AGI.
Because, of course, as you say, the singularity may not happen. So let's just get human level intelligence in machines.
10 years.
10 years. You mean what you say, okay? And
He has to cater to his investors.
We don't have any investors. Careful.
You'll be bankrupt in 10 years if you don't have AGI.
No, but we might. We'll achieve it in 10 years. We have to.
There's no fallback plan.
No, we strive within 10 years. But of course, if we didn't believe that within we can achieve something that approaches human level, then what we're doing is wrong. I think we really should focus and work as hard as possible to actually achieve that, to actually get us further, rather than thinking it's going to be in 150 years and then being much more relaxed about it and not actually taking the right steps to get there.
So what are those steps? I mean, if it's only 10 years, you must already have a pretty concrete set of steps that you're going for that will tell you you're on track to doing this.
Yes, we have our roadmap. We published it. It's already out of date because we continually improve and change our targets in light of what we find out.
But just give us a flavor of what those sorts of steps are.
Sure. So there are a number of things. One of them is the concept of learning to learn, gradual learning, meta-learning. And we have actually released a competition that was running for the last 6 months on trying to build agents that gradually learn. They acquire knowledge that is not forgotten and that is exploited for faster and faster being able to solve new unseen tasks. So this is one of the problems that we believe we need to solve. This learning to learn is essentially building systems that learn to learn themselves rather than having one fixed algorithm that is doing all the learning. So we have identified a number of those kind of properties that our agents need to have, and then we believe that teaching our agents according to some form of curriculum akin to the ones that we use in school. So having an ordered set of tasks that are of increasing complexity then can help us speed up the development of the agent in the right way without needing huge amounts of data, or at least not as much as what other teams require.
So but what about these things in AI that we've made almost no progress in the last 50 years of AI. We've made pretty much no progress on common sense reasoning. That if I hold this bottle up, if I turn this upside down, everyone in this room knows the water's going to flow out of this bottle, right? But no computer knows that unless we explicitly write down every one of those sorts of facts.
Well, I think it's a trade-off between essentially being able to instill prior knowledge into our models. And I think this was, this is one of the tricky part on how to actually build sufficiently powerful algorithms while easily incorporating prior knowledge, including physics. So if we instill physics in, or the way that physics works in the natural world, we can actually help the learning part of the process to get to understand those kind of behavior. So it's a trade-off between the amount of work we put into the curriculum that learns from data, learns from experience, and the amount of prior knowledge that we explicitly put into those models. That includes the natural laws and a huge amount of other knowledge that can be exploited and eventually jointly used in order to actually progress and learn to a level that is similar to us.
Do you welcome our coming machine masters?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call them masters, but I think if we focus on the right aspects of value alignment, on incorporating some limitations and some ways for us to communicate with those algorithms, then I think we have a lot to look forward to. But if we do it in the wrong way, then just like with any wrong use of technology, this can be bad for us. So focusing on the right questions, on the right research questions, then yes, I welcome our not masters, but potential extensions of ourselves, just like technical extensions that we have now, mobile phones, computers, medicine, all those things.
Kevin.
Of course I don't welcome a new master. That's nonsense. I'll fight a new master.
But you said that we can't enslave them, so if they're going to be so much superior to us, are they not then inherently going to be our master?
That depends on what motivates them. I mean, perhaps they will just be uninterested in us. It would be nice if we could get along in a broader community of equals, ethical equals at least, if not intellectual equals.
But the history of evolution has not been a good one.
The history of humanity?
Yes. Well, we haven't treated people we haven't treated the animals on the planet.
Yes, those who have superior technology and economic resources have tended to treat the others rather badly. That's right. Hopefully we won't take that as a model for constructing our AIs.
Okay. Right. We've going to shift now to questions from the audience.
Given that at any one point in time there are a number of human beings who are essentially crazy, for want of a better word.
Who could you be thinking of?
No, I was.
It's hard to tell at this point in history, actually.
Exactly, but I was thinking of the example of John Nash, famous mathematician, extremely capable, but had schizophrenia, so he's delusional. He was extremely functional for quite a period of time, but then the delusion started to take over. I think that's one of the interesting problems that potentially exists in the search for artificial general intelligence, is that at one point they may be lucid and willing participants in the joint enterprise we have together, but there's a fine line between genius and insanity, and I think it's an interesting thing to contemplate how you manage those sorts of issues.
So are we going to need artificial insanity as well to go with our artificial intelligence?
How about some artificial psychiatrists?
An old AI joke.
Yeah, I agree that it's interesting. I don't think anybody's trying to reproduce human insanity artificially. Well, of course, there were some early things like Rector and whatever, but nothing really serious.
I think this is one of the perfect examples of why studying the human brain is really beneficial. Because if we are able to understand those kinds of diseases, then we might be able to understand a process that in our AGIs, or our agents, could eventually develop, and how to prevent it. So I think studying those problems and then getting inspired by them and then use it to actually prevent this happening is really, really useful.
Yeah, we might better understand human creativity by understanding our diseases of the mind and utilize that. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, question at the front here.
My question relates back to the idea of being able to control AIs. Given that we can't really control humans, if we had human-level AIs, why do we think we'd be any better at controlling them?
I don't think that, so that must be a question for Jan.
Well, the development of human-level AI is a reasonable goal, but as I said, emulating it or simulating it, it's not necessarily what we might want. We might want systems that are, or that have the capability of solving as many tasks as we are able to, but ideally without all the negative things, like, you know, the randomness in the behavior of the people, the craziness and all those things. So I'm not arguing that we will be able to fully control them, but I think it's definitely something that we should investigate more, and it might be controllable if we don't simply simulate the ways that human brain work.
So, Kevin, since you refused to answer that question, it requires me then to ask you the obvious logical follow-on to that, which is then, are you actually saying we shouldn't develop AGI? If we can't control it, then should we? And there are all these risks?
No, I'll stand by my earlier answer. I think we should develop an AGI that embodies a reasonable ethics. We shouldn't be controlling it. We should be cooperating with it.
Well, we try that with our children and we fail.
Well, yes. Our children are humans are diverse and not controllable. I don't think AGI is controllable either. But if we can make progress on understanding ethics and putting it into algorithms, then we can certainly build them to be ethical.
So
I do think, I agree it's a pressing problem. When I say 150 years, I don't mean to say that it's not urgent. 150 years is urgent. 2,500 years of arguing about it and getting very little progress is a bad sign relative to a 150-year goal line.
So I do suggest to people this needs to be the golden age of philosophy.
Yeah, we do need more philosophers. We need some damn good ones. That's right.
Philosophy's got itself sidetracked and to lots of different problems and is not really doing anything very relevant to our lives.
No, that's just unfair. Actually, philosophers are taking computers quite seriously and utilizing them in simulations that are very pointed, and experimental philosophy is booming, and I think it's really promising.
So tell people what experimental philosophy is. I think some people, most people probably didn't even know that experimental philosophy existed.
Sure, experimental philosophy is developed in the last couple of decades, and basically the idea, I guess the idea is a little bit older than that. The fundamental idea is that most philosophy, or at least philosophy that is methodologically oriented, can be tested in computer simulation. If it's a methodology, then there's an algorithm or an algorithmic concept to it, and you can develop a computer simulation which implements that algorithm, and you can see how it performs and whether it performs well, and so on. So you can explore things like what is the best approach to experimentation in a certain domain by building a computer program and simulating that domain.
Okay, more questions. The gentleman at the back there.
You've mentioned a lot this idea of an intelligence explosion and an AGI coming about either together or as an AGI as a result of an intelligence explosion. Do you think it's possible that we could develop an intelligent artificial special intelligence of a level where it could continually improve itself without ever gaining artificial general intelligence, a la the paperclip maximizer idea?
Yeah, I think AlphaGo is sort of in that category. It improves itself by playing itself. And so it can certainly continue to improve in playing Go, perhaps indefinitely.
Yes, I agree with that answer, and but that's not necessarily the thing that we're interested in. So the generality is really the holy grail and the unsolved.
But I like Go. It's a great game. Anyway, the difference between AlphaGo a year ago and AlphaGo this year is nothing to me because it's so beyond me. I couldn't possibly notice the difference.
But now it's a Go God.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, there was another question there as well in the middle.
I'm interested to hear the panel's thoughts on quantum computers and their role in searching for AI, general AI.
Mm-hmm. Well, I already mentioned something, but I don't know enough about it to be able to give any meaningful answer. But I know that there are areas, especially in computational mechanics, that argue that in order to build models, this kind of representation is much more powerful and has a lot to offer that needs to be explored much, much further. So I think we will see some interesting results, theoretical results at least, in this area that are relevant for building intelligent machines.
I don't know anything in particular about quantum mechanics or quantum computers. My layman's understanding is that it's a way of boosting the compute power enormously, which is fine, but it doesn't address design issues or software issues or what have you, but maybe Toby knows better.
Yeah, well, actually, I do have a degree in physics as well. So, quantum computers is somewhat irrelevant technology in terms of what we're discussing because you can simulate any quantum computing device on a conventional computer with an exponential slowdown. So they buy you an exponential speed advantage, which will be great because Moore's law is dead. So we need to get computing continuing performance, but as Kevin says, there's still lots of other things that we'll have to do on the software side of things. So having that speed improvement is not going to be enough. Question at the side.
If there's 10 years until general AGI, what about the user interface, the AI UI? Is that not part of your roadmap?
User interface?
Yeah. To us.
Yes, but it's not necessarily in the form of user interface, but in terms of interpretability of the system. So truly and fully understanding what it's doing. We as designers, we are able to interface with those systems quite explicitly, but the difficulty is really fully understanding the behavior and the implications of that and where it will lead. And I think that's where we need to focus a lot of our work on, because it's a difficult problem generally, not only in general AI, but in AI and machine learning that's narrow. And if we do that right, we will be able to not only interface, but also interpret everything that's going on. So we have that in our roadmap, and we're actively working on that.
I mean, isn't the interface easy, right? Just it's the interface we already have with other intelligent machines. You say things, I listen. I write things, you read them. Right? That's the interface it's going to be.
Yes, exactly.
It's just going to be like the movie Her, right? You're going to have this continuing conversation that follows you around that is the AI that's in your life. Kevin?
I have nothing particular to add.
Okay. There's a question there in the middle. Just a gentleman in the glasses.
You mentioned consciousness, and Daniel Dennett was mentioned before. I haven't heard you talking about free will. Do you actually believe that humans have free will, and what kind of relevance does that concept have for AI?
Oh, thank you for the question. Yes, that was one of the other concepts on my list of troubling concepts. So let's go on to free will, right? And we've only got 4 minutes.
In 4 minutes? Solve the problem of free will?
We don't
it's about
ask
as
much
easy as
of it.
ethics. It's about as easy to do as ethics. I tend towards compatibilism when the view is that it doesn't really pose any kind of problem. That free will, in some sense, free will is an illusion. That would be the compatibilist answer. Not that your conscious state of expressing free will is illusory or something like that, but that it wouldn't look any different whether it were deterministic or stochastic or what have you. Free will is a matter of how internal decision making is done, and it evolved just like everything in the human brain of significance evolved, and so there are functional aspects to it, and therefore it can be put into a computer program.
Yeah.
I think
In 10 years' time, do we have free will?
I think bounded free will. I mean, in the sense that if it's possible to provide this for our agents, then why not, as long as it's bounded and aligned with our values. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose of, or might result in an issue where it might go off in a direction or tangent that's not useful for us. So within limited bounds, I think, why not?
So, I think about if you think that free will is a stochastic process, you should go out and read a wonderful cult novel, The Dice Man by Luke Reinhardt, and you can decide whether there should be a random component in free will. It's a good fun read. Okay, we have time for one last question. The gentleman at the back.
Given the inherent risk of building something that we can't control, should we regulate its development?
Okay, let's end with a big one then. Do we need regulation?
I think we need social agreement. I'd say the same thing about all the technologies that we can't control.
And yeah.
Well, I think there might be some reasons for certain types of regulations, but more than actually giving an answer, I think we actually need to, as a community, start discussing those issues more carefully. And we are actually now working on preparing another stage of our competition that's all about AI race avoidance. And how do you actually make sure that companies, governments, researchers don't skimp on safety aspect of building general AI systems? And one answer to actually solve this problem might be regulation. So we really need to sit down and actually start thinking about to what degree is this beneficial, to what degree it can help us, but not actually slow us down.
Yeah, actually, Toby's letter to the UN is more or less about consensual regulation, self-regulation through the UN, that we shouldn't be building killer robots. We might well want to do similar things with other aspects of AI technology.
Okay, so, well, that brings us on very to the end of the hour, and we have to finish. But thank you for coming, and do join us for the rest of the week for more conversations about other aspects of how AI is likely to be touching your lives in the future. And now, please join with me in thanking our two panelists for giving us such food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you.